The U.S. over its history has expanded a lot, which begs the question, which U.S. president expanded the most? This is just going to be a quick list. Number 9, Woodrow Wilson. You probably know Wilson as the president during World War I, but in a certain turn of events, he was left with homework of over 50 years of whaling between the Danish and Americans. The Danish, who ruled the Danish West Indies, realized it became expensive as the slaves had revolted and they were paying them was a huge hassle after abolition. Even during the U.S. Civil War, the nation had its eyes on the territory as a security asset. The U.S. also wanted more economic power in the Caribbean. The threat soon came up that Germany might want to take the islands from Denmark, as it would pass the Monroe Doctrine. So for the U.S., getting these islands as fast as possible was top priority. Negotiations began in 1865, and they succeeded in 1867, only the Senate would not pass it. Negotiations began again in the 1890s, only it was spoiled by the Spanish-American War. That war gave the U.S., I'm going to talk it later in this video. Since the Panama Canal was in construction, the Danish West Indies became more and more valuable. In 1902, more negotiations began, and they came up with another answer, only to be shot down by the Danish Parliament. In 1915, with World War I raging, the U.S. began more negotiations. Even though the Danish did not want to give up the islands right now, with its black majority to segregated Americans, they were bullied into a treaty by the U.S. military. It agreed to give their islands to the U.S. for 25 million gold coins. Number 8, Ronald Reagan. Yeah, Ronald Reagan probably had nothing to do with this, but it was officially became a U.S. territory during his reign as president. You could probably give the credit to FDR and Truman. Basically, the Northern Mariana Islands were German until World War I, when Japan captured them with military force. But during World War II, the islands were captured by U.S. forces. After the war, the U.S. decided to temporarily put control over the islands to the U.S. The islands actually had no plans of leaving the U.S. Multiple times they pleaded with the U.S. to join Guam, but every time Guam refused. Soon in the 1970s, more political parties wanted to make the Northern Mariana Islands a commonwealth in the United States. Finally, in 1986, the islands joined the U.S., and the islanders became U.S. citizens. Reagan honestly could care less about the islands. We should be giving credit to FDR and Truman, but they weren't even alive during this time. Number 7, William McKinley. McKinley gained the most territories than any other president. He gained Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and even Hawaii. To be fair, though, he did not really want the land. The Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown by rich sugar farmers and proclaimed the Republic of Hawaii and wanted to get annexed by the U.S., but the president did not want the great powers of Europe getting mad at America. But it seemed everyone wanted to go to war with one nation, Spain. The Spanish had been oppressing uprisings in their colonies of the Philippines and Cuba, some of the last parts of the Spanish Empire. And America understood their fight for freedom like they did 120 years ago. Teddy Roosevelt, who had been beefing up the Navy, wanted to show off the U.S. military. After many demands, McKinley sent the USS Maine to Havana Harbor to secure American interests. But a few days later, it mysteriously blew up. Now, even today, no one knew what blew up the ship in the harbor, but everyone thought it was Spain back then. Soon, everyone demanded war, and only for the third time in American history, McKinley declared war. The war was very short, lasting less than 6 weeks, just enough time for Theodore Roosevelt to get glory. But during the war, McKinley realized it was easier to annex Hawaii as a refuel spot on the way to Guam and the Philippines. So during the 6 weeks, Hawaii was annexed. After the war, a small skirmish began in the Samoan Islands between Germany and America after Germany destroyed some American property on the islands. Soon both nations were prepared for war in the Samoan Islands. Only both fleets were destroyed by a typhoon. Soon peace was made. Germany got the Western Islands and America got the Eastern Islands. Number 6, James Madison. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this one because I made a video on it. It's called The History of West Florida. It's a really good video. Actually, it's terrible, but still watch it. Just go watch it. Number 5, Franklin Pierce. As the railroads crossed America, a railroad from California to Texas became desirable to expand trade opportunities. There's just one problem: the mountains. The Rocky Mountains that crossed north to south made the Southern Railroad almost impossible to make. There was one way, though. Mexico had perfect land, and if the U.S. could acquire that land, the railroad could happen. The Pierce administration, who began in 1853, had huge expansion plans. They even tried to buy Cuba. Since Pierce was born down south, he especially wanted to expand slavery any way he could, and it seemed perfect. Mexico and the U.S. began negotiations in 1853, although the governor of New Mexico declared that they already owned the land. But since the Mexicans were in financial turmoil, they wanted to sell the land. Pierce actually offered to buy Baja California for $50 million too, but Mexico refused. Soon the U.S. asked to buy the Gadsden land for $15 million. Soon the treaty was accepted in both Mexico and the United States. Number 4. James Monroe. During the 1810s, escaped slaves were fleeing Georgia into Florida, plus many invasions of Florida by small militias led to Spain and the U.S. ceding the territory to the United States. The treaty came up that gave the Americans Florida and Spain Texas, which became the new country of Mexico. Number 3. Andrew Johnson. Okay, you might not know Andrew Johnson as the Reconstruction president, and you would be right. Although shared with Russia for Alaska. You see, Alaska was a weight on the Russian economy. Also, they were trying to pay off debt of the Crimean War. Since Britain might as well just walk right in and take over the place, they decided to sell it to the U.S., but the U.S. was in the middle of a civil war, so they could not purchase the territory. But straight after, the U.S. bought it for $7.2 million. Number 2. Thomas Jefferson. Okay, you probably already know this one. When Jefferson became president, the French, who controlled the Greater Louisiana Territory, were planning to put tariffs on the port of New Orleans. But since the French had just lost Haiti to a slave revolt, Federalists wanted to invade the territory for themselves. But since Jefferson was a proud Democratic Republican, he wanted to buy the port of New Orleans. In Europe, Napoleon was itching for an invasion of the British Isles, so he decided to sell the entire territory for $50 million. Soon the nation doubled itself overnight with 500,000 new square miles of territory. Number 1. James K. Polk. James Polk was the expanding president. He's literally responsible for a third of American land. Polk came into office and instantly annexed Texas in the first few months. He also manipulated the Mexicans to go to war, which was a huge success. And although he did not get the entire Oregon territory, he stopped war with Great Britain. He also did it in one term, and he didn't even try to re-elect himself. Ain't he awesome? Except for slavery and all that stuff. Honorable mentions. Okay, I'm hearing you. What about George Washington, who helped get American independence? Well, he wasn't president at the time, although there was a Continental Congress president named Thomas Mifflin. You could also say Thomas Jefferson got the colonies and territories to the Mississippi independent as he signed the Treaty of Paris, but since none of them were presidents at the time, they all don't count. Also, Lincoln technically didn't expand the U.S. because the southern states never